This is Chapter 18, The Third Great Filter, Part 2, from a story called The Time-Dilated Generations, by Esteban Gallardo. The departure hall of one of Negusa's most prestigious airports hummed with quiet, controlled chaos. The polished floors gleamed under the artificial light, reflecting the movements of the privileged few who graced its halls. Corporate executives in tailored suits murmured into sleek communication devices, preparing for business ventures that would widen the ever-growing chasm between the rich and the desperate. Wealthy families, their designer luggage rolling smoothly behind them, spoke in loud, exaggerated tones about their 10th vacation of the year, a trip that would be forgotten before the next indulgence arrived. The less fortunate, the workers, the low-income travelers, the expendable masses, were nowhere in sight. They departed from a different terminal, one far from the pristine luggage of this enclave of the elite. Society had long perfected the art of segregation. There was no need for signs or barriers. The lines had been drawn generations ago. Gerald Gibson moved unnoticed among them, a ghost in plain sight. Dressed in a crisp, white server's uniform, he offered expensive delicacies to those who wouldn't even look at him. But Gerald hadn't earned this position. He had bought it. A hefty sum, the last of his savings, had secured his place for today. The actual server, a desperate man like himself, had been all too eager to accept the offer. Management won't even notice, the man had assured him. They never do. The system had rotted to the point where those at the top barely bothered to maintain their own facade of control. Supervisors existed to bark threats, to demand unpaid labor, but beyond that, they had grown complacent. And so, Gerald had worked for hours without disturbance. To the people in this terminal, he didn't exist. He was nothing more than a moving tray, a background prop in their extravagant lives, until, inevitably, someone noticed him for the wrong reasons. A shrill, mocking voice pierced the air. "Wow, I didn't know they hired ugly old fucks like you." Gerald didn't flinch. He turned smoothly, his expression frozen in the neutral, professional mask of a trained waiter. The speaker was a middle-aged woman, bloated with indulgence, her tacky, overpriced vacation outfit a grotesque attempt at luxury. The colors clashed. The jewelry was excessive. Everything about her screamed privilege without refinement. He said nothing. There was nothing she could say that would break his focus. Instead, he simply lifted his tray, presenting her with an assortment of finely crafted delicacies. The protocol was simple. Serve, step back, disappear. She took far more than necessary, stuffing her plate greedily, the sight of wealth hoarding excess without a second thought. That didn't matter. Gerald had prepared hundreds of them. But the woman wasn't finished. She wasn't satisfied with just taking. She needed to humiliate. "In fact, I should be grateful to you," she sneered, chewing with an open mouth, as if savoring the insult more than the food. Gerald remained silent. She turned, calling someone behind her. "Timothy, come here. You need to see this." A teenager, around 17, lumbered over with slow, apathetic movements of a boy who had never known hardship. His fingers never left his sleek, high-end smartphone, barely acknowledging his mother's request. "What do you want?" he muttered, eyes still glued to his screen. "Gosh, leave the screen for a second," she snapped, exasperated. "Look at this man." For the first time, the boy's gaze lifted. "An old, poor bastard," his mother declared, her voice dripping with performative disgust. "A lazy parasite who never worked hard enough to be anything more than a waiter at his age." Gerald felt nothing. The words meant nothing. The teenager sighed. "Yeah, whatever. I'm not wasting my time with this bullshit." Before walking away, he grabbed the last 3 delicacies from the tray, not out of hunger, but of sheer indifference. "I'm out. Don't call me again for this." His mother, however, still had one last drop of venom to spit. "You, sir," she said, her tone dripping with mock righteousness, "should be ashamed of yourself." Gerald finally met her gaze. Her beady, self-important eyes bore into him with the conviction of someone who had never known the true struggle. "It's because of parasites like you that society doesn't work," she snapped, as if she were the one offended. And then she was gone, vanishing back into her curated, disconnected world. Gerald let out a slow breath, lowering the tray with careful precision. He turned, walking calmly back toward the private service room where the rest of the delicacies had been prepared. Hundreds more, each laced with something special. something only a biochemical engineer with expertise in low-cost viral modification could create. Gerald had starved for this moment, and soon they would know what it felt like to be powerless. For the time-dilated society, the fall of Nagus happened in the blink of an eye. From their perspective, barely 2 months had passed when the first reports of an unknown illness surfaced. At first it was nothing more than a whisper, a footnote in the endless streams of interstellar news. But whispers soon turned to panic, and then to silence. 1 year after Gerald Gibson introduced his creation into the world, the incubation period ended. The dying began. It started with fever, a mild discomfort, easily dismissed. Then came the breathing difficulties, a tightening in the chest, the sensation of drowning in open air. Within days, the coughing fits started. At first, it was a trickle of blood, then a flood. Once the symptoms appeared, death was inevitable. The virus moved with terrifying efficiency, spreading through airports, corporate meetings, luxury resorts, private compounds, the very spaces occupied by the elite who had so thoroughly distanced themselves from the rest of society. No amount of wealth, privilege, or power could stop it. Attempts to isolate the infected were meaningless. Quarantine zones became graveyards. By the year 562 after arrival, every last human on Nagus was dead. 4 billion lives, erased in less than a year. To the generational fleet, it was a nightmare that played out in weeks. One moment, Nagus stood as a shining beacon of human achievement, a world that had defied the odds, a second Earth thriving under alien skies. The next, it was silent. The horror lasted less than 2 months in their time-dilated reality. They had watched Rigel 1 fall in slow agony, stretching over a century, but Nagus had vanished like a massive dying star, collapsing in on itself in an instant. And just like that, the second Earth was gone. That was part 2 of Chapter 18, The Third Great Filter, from a story called The Time-Dilated Generations, by Esteban Gallardo. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.